Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Doffney and I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Regina Fitzpatrick, who is the State Library's Genealogy Librarian. Some of you may know her, worked with her in the past. She's really, really fantastic. And today she's going to be talking about something unique to kind of New Jersey, is this researching this pre-May 1848 New Jersey ancestors. For those of you who might not be familiar, New Jersey did not start mandating vital records, so birth, marriage, and death records, be kept and issued until May of 1848. So she's going to talk about how you can kind of conduct that type of research when you're looking for those pre-May 1848 ancestors. So before we jump into our presentation, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. We will be taking your questions at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to send them at any time to us using the Q&A or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. Regina has provided a copy of the slides as well as a flowchart that I will be uploading to the chat. So as we're going through the presentation, you can download them from the chat and follow along. If you have any problems downloading it from the chat, they'll be available in a follow-up email with also a link to the recording. At the end of the webinar, there will be a survey available. So if you have time, we ask you please complete the survey. We really, truly appreciate any and all feedback that you can give us. And if you want to learn more about stuff that's covered here today or anything related to genealogy, Regina has curated a fantastic research guide at the web address on the screen there. And I will be sending that out in the chat as well so that everybody can look at that at your leisure. And then one last thing, this is what your dashboard should look like if you are using a PC or a Mac. If you're using a mobile device, the Zoom dashboard may look a little bit different, but all of the features will still be there. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can check your audio settings. So if you're using an external listening device like a headset or earbuds, you can check to make sure that it's connected properly there. At any point during the presentation, if you have any issues, there is a raise hand button here in the middle. You can click on that and that'll alert me. I'll send you a message in Zoom and hopefully be able to resolve any problems that you are having. And then, as I mentioned before, if you do have questions, there's a Q&A or the chat buttons. You can use either of them to get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to address them at the end of Regina's presentation. So that is everything that I have for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Regina now.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I promise I'm not being rude. I usually stay on camera. However, the way I have my setup configured, I'm going to have to be looking this way in order to kind of follow along with my slides. So for the presentation, I'm going to turn my camera off and then I'll turn it back on for Q&A. Give me just 1 second. I'm going to share my screen, start my timer. And we will be good to go. Let me just turn off my camera. Okay. So welcome everybody. My name is Regina. I am the genealogy librarian here at the State Library. And today we are going to be talking about researching your pre-May of 1848 ancestors. My goal for today is to give you some highlights of some really useful collections that you can use. You'll be provided with these slides. They have links all over them. I hope they're a great resource for you. And let's get started. Whoops. Or maybe I have to do that. Yes, I do. Okay. So New Jersey is the second state in the United States to begin collecting vital records at the state level and do so continuously. We started doing this in May of 1848, and we continue to do that through the present time. We like the vital records because they gather a lot of important clues and information into a single place. If you're researching before May of 1848, you kind of have to jump around a little bit more to find the same information. It's not necessarily that it's not out there, you just have to kind of go through a number of additional collections in order to compile or assemble. And we're going to talk about some examples of these. The other good news is that a lot more of collections that are relevant to the pre-May of 1848 time period are being digitized and are freely available online. Some are in progress with more to come, and some of them are complete. So that's something really great, and it makes this time period a lot easier to implement, to research at home. However, you do still have to go through some paywalls, or you do have to go in person to research some things still. I just want everybody to be aware of that. The other thing, and we can talk about this a little bit more in the Q&A if you like, I didn't put this on the slide, but I want to emphasize to you it's really important for this time period. And I know that many of you who are researching in this time period are trying to get into DAR, SAR, or another lineage society, but no cheating. That means you start where you are. If you are just beginning your research and you want to get back to that Revolutionary War hero that you think you're related to, no cheating, jumping backwards and just researching his family and then clumsily trying to connect yourself to them. No, you have to start with you, work backwards through the 21st century into the 20th, and so on and so forth. You have to go generational order. I know that's a pain. I know it's a lot more fun and sexy to just jump right to the time period you're interested in and start your research there, but do the work you need to do to get back to that generation, and it'll save you a lot of headaches in the long run. So it's an important thing I wanted to emphasize before we continue. The other thing I just briefly want to talk about is the handout that you're receiving. There are two things I want to say. Well, three things actually. The first thing is you'll see a bunch of blue text on your slides. The URLs and the links in this particular flowchart are not active. This is just an image. They're active in your PDF. So go ahead and use the PDF. I do have you linked to records collections and resources there, but you can't get to them from these slides. This is just an image. Thing two, to the left of the slide is after May of 1848 stuff. So if your ancestor was born in New Jersey before 1848, but continued to live in New Jersey after May of 1848, and you know that they got married or died here, I want you to go after those vital records. Start your research in the vital records era, because that compiled information is going to potentially help you. So if your ancestor was just born before May of 1848, still look up a marriage or death record for them if they did in fact stay in New Jersey. To the right of the image that you're seeing on your screen is all of the resources you could potentially go to um, for research in the pre-May of 1848 time period. The one thing I will say is these are example collections. We are going to be reviewing a lot of these. However, there are certain things that I just could not fit into this flow chart. So you may be looking at some different resources that are not represented on here. If anybody has any questions about the flow chart, please let me know in the Q&A. I'm happy to come back to this and talk about this a little bit more. So the first thing is, where do you start? And we just reviewed this a little bit, but the golden rule is when you are doing genealogy research, you always start with the final event in a person's life and you work your way forward. This is pre-May of 1848, and this is after May of 1848. So just again, if anybody, was just born before May of 1848 and they lived and died in New Jersey after, then you want to go after those vital records. And below, I have links to indexes on the archive's website. I also note that the very earliest New Jersey vital records, those are birth, marriage, and deaths, um, the very earliest ones are digitized on Ancestry. I have the collection name on there for you. Go forth. If you have trouble just doing a name search, your relative isn't coming up on Ancestry, and you have a marriage or a death, it may be worth still going back to the archives indexes that I have linked below, um, and uh, and checking the indexes to see if you can find the names, if they're spelled slightly differently than what you think, if a first name isn't quite what you thought it was, that might be right. Those indexes are transcribed from the original ledger indexes that are in the state archives possession. So that's where these indexes that are online on their website come from. They're transcribed directly from those volumes. And then, I spent all this time talking about vital records. Well, what do you do if you are researching somebody who lived in New Jersey, but their entire life was before May of 1848? Well, then you start with the Secretary of State's estate records, and these are a very comprehensive collection. I described the vital records collection as comprehensive. Well, this is one of the incredibly comprehensive collections that we have for pre-May of 1848. And let's talk about these estate papers. These were papers that were filed with the Secretary of State's office. They are held by the New Jersey State Archives, and you can order them online. These records, as far as I know, are not digitized. However, we're going to take a look at a screenshot of a will in a few minutes that I found on Ancestry that appears to be a Secretary of State's recorded will volume. So I don't know if I just wasn't aware that these were digitized, but the recorded wills may be on Ancestry. These are different than the original files. The recorded wills is just the recording of the wills. It will not include a recorded copy of an inventory or anything else. So just FYI. So this particular collection will not only include wills, but it will include other documents that are related to anything involving the estate, anything that would be produced or triggered by somebody's death that they needed to dispose or pass on their property or goods. We like the wills the best, obviously, because they give us really fantastic kinship information. However, there isn't only a will, but every single document, even if somebody died intestate and did not have a will have a probate date. And it's fairly good guess that the probate date is within about 2 months of a person's death. To the right, we have an image of a page from the Calendar of New Jersey Wills. This is a fantastic resource if you are researching in the colonial era up to 1817, because it summarizes the contents of an estate paper collection of an individual for you. And we are going to look at the bottom entry on the page to the right for Silas Hathaway Sr. in just 1 minute. The other, and I have a link to it. It is digitized because this particular resource was produced in the early 20th century. So it's out of copyright law. All the volumes are out online. The complementary volume to the Calendar of New Jersey Wills is the Index to New Jersey Wills, which covers New Jersey wills filed to the Secretary of State's office from the late 17th century up to about 1900. That will give you a citation, and then you can go on the State Archives website and order records. Calendar of New Jersey Wills will do the same. However, it may only refer to the recorded copy. This is not the case in a couple of these. I'm seeing the file number on these, which should be the original document, but there is, in addition, a recorded copy. So I mentioned that probate date is usually within fairly soon after deaths. If we look at Silas Hathaway Jr. or Sr., and if you can see my mouse, I'm underlining the bolded part that begins the summary of his estate. We can see it starts out that his will is dated January 13th, 1803. So he had to be alive on this date because he was the one who had to write the will. So we know he was alive on January 13th. And then at the bottom, we see that an inventory was created on February 21st, 1803. And so we know by then he was dead. So we can estimate Silas Hathaway Sr.'s death date as sometime between January 13th and February 21st, 1803. An inventory is not made until somebody has died. So that's how we know he's dead at that point. And then if you do want to make it broader, the will was proved on March 16th, 1803. So there are dates for you to work with, but it's a good bet that he died between January 13th and February 21st. The bottom under David Peer and John Hinchman, the file number that refers to the original will, the Lieber 40, page 288, refers to the recorded copy of the will. And now, like I said, these might be digitized. If you've had a chance to look at the entry while I'm talking, you can see provides a summary. It tells this the calendar tells you who Silas's wife is. It mentions specific children and their bequest and what they got, who the executors of the estate were, and who the witnesses are, plus key dates in the administration process. So this is all really useful information. Now, here is what the recorded copy of the will looks like. And again, I found this digitized on Ancestry, which surprises me. So these might be out here now. But I put up page 2 of this document for you because it has a lot of bequests. Silas Hathaway Sr. was a Revolutionary War veteran and a significant property owner. He had several children. Several of his daughters are married. So in this document, you get his daughter's married names and their husband's names. I believe he had 7 children, and all 7 children are named in here by name, as is his wife. This is not always the case in these documents. And we're in a second, we're going to be looking at an example in another collection where several people are not named. The other thing, oh yes, the other thing I wanted to mention is that this document is also interesting and useful to us because it mentions that there are children under the age of 21, which was the age of majority at the time. So he, in addition to having married children, he also has some underage children as well. So this is a really interesting document. It collects a lot of information for us. We like this. It is incredibly valuable. It tells us who his friends, associates, and family members were. And we have a lot of clues now that we can use to answer various questions about Silas Hathaway moving forward. So in an ideal circumstances, you get a will, but at the very least, any estate papers are going to have that probate date, so you can guesstimate a date of death. Okay, and then beyond the Secretary of State's, you're going to see throughout this presentation that I pair records collections. So the Secretary of State's papers go up to 1900. The county estate papers started at the founding date of the county. However, the founding date of the county means the founding date of the county after the Revolutionary War. So it's usually sometime in the 1790s the when the county offices were founded. And then obviously newer counties had later founding dates. In the county government, there were two county offices that were established, the county surrogates and the county clerks. The county surrogate deals solely with matters relating to estates. So anything related to a will is filed with that office. Usually there is some kind of dispute or some kind of court action, but it's not necessarily the case. Um, and then sometimes what is interesting in this period and even in later periods is if you are unable to find a will in the Secretary of State's office, and remember, this is post-Revolutionary War, so this does not apply to your Revolutionary or colonial ancestors necessarily, but if you're researching in the late 1780s, 1790s-ish forward, and you can't find a will at the Secretary of State's in the Secretary of State's collection over at the state archives, it's worth double checking to see if the estate was filed with the county. Also, more good news. The surrogates and clerks' offices for each county worked with FamilySearch.org, which is the genealogy branch of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to digitize their records. So a lot of records from this time period have been digitized. Yay. However, bad news, they're digitized, they're not searchable by name. So basically they digitize the microfilm and you have to go through the records collections, essentially like a roll of microfilm. To access these collections, what you do is you go into the image search, you put in the county name, it will pull up all the records they have for that particular county. There's a filter called Life Event that you use. And for the estate papers, I've found that in most cases, anything related to the estates is under the legal subtopic under the Life Event filter. So again, we're going to be looking at a very similar document. Joseph Wright lived in Salem County in Mannington, and his will is very interesting because Silas Hathaway was very thorough in naming his wife all of his children. Well, Joseph Wright was married twice. He mentions both wives. His first wife died, we're assuming. And then he has a current wife, and neither of them are named in this document, which is very interesting. Also, only 2 of his 6 children. It's mentioned in this document that he has 6 children, but only 2 of them are named and given very specific bequests. Just generally, he says, hey, I want everything sold, divide everything equally between all 6 of the kids. And then to his son John, who was his son by his second wife, he leaves a wooded lot and a suit of his best clothes. And then on page 2, his daughter Lydia who we assume is one of the children who is of the first marriage, because he specifically says that his five oldest and then his youngest, and I think he specifically says five oldest by my first wife. So that defines. So I'm assuming Lydia is a daughter of the first marriage. She gets 6 silver teaspoons marked with initials TWL. So I'm wondering if those are the initials of her mother, the first wife, and that might give us some detective work to do if we are looking into Lydia and if we are interested in researching the first wife of Joseph Wright's family. Now, if we were interested in researching the second wife, she is not named, but guess what? Her mom and dad are in here in the second to last paragraph of this deed. Uh, I'm sorry, of this will. Joseph Wright names his father-in-law and mother-in-law Abraham and Elizabeth Miller. They are living on a property that he owns, and if they pay their debt to the estate, he authorizes the executors to deed them the property, essentially. So we could potentially research Abraham and Elizabeth Miller and see if that particular deed, if they did in fact pay their debt to the estate, if that gives maybe their daughter's name, or if this bequest and the terms of this will are particularly mentioned. And that may give us some clue as to what her name may have been. We know her maiden name was Miller, but we don't know anything else. So this gives us some detective work to do if this is our family and we are researching them. And we are going to be looking at daughter Lydia potentially a little bit later. So those are your estate papers. You can either look in the Secretary of State's office or with the county surrogates. County surrogates are digitized. The recorded books, which are Secretary of State's collection, may be out on Ancestry. At least volume 40 is. Okay, so that is an obvious records collection to check for genealogy. However, when I started doing genealogical research in this time period, um, what my entryway into this type of research was through deeds, specifically the early land records database, because I was working at the state archives at the time and I was doing transcriptions. And that's how I uncovered the Bass family. I found these two women selling land, and here it turns out that they're Jeremiah Bass's daughters. So we're going to talk about them in a minute. Um, and it gave these deeds, I was shocked. They gave me a whole bunch of genealogical information because they were relating the terms of the father's will. And so I was able to put a lot of information. So do not skip on your deed research. For this time period, there's a records collection called the Early Land Records, which is maintained by the New Jersey State Archives. Um, Goes up to about 1800, although now that the East and West New Jersey proprietary records, some of them are added into this resource, the dates have changed somewhat. The records in this resource do include the deeds that are filed with the Secretary of State's office, survey books, loose surveys, any records from the proprietors' collections that were indexed in this resource. But really, where the genealogical gold mine is likely to be is probably the deeds. In some cases, I have seen this record type even include mention in passing about when somebody died, which is pretty cool. Also, I have been in the past able to use a deed to construct a 4-generation family tree because the terms of the wills were laid out and everybody was identified. And so that was really neat. So sometimes there's not a whole lot. The example we're looking at, I picked a short one just to give you a sense of what an entire deed would look like. Does not have a lot of genealogical information. I just put it up because I know who everybody is here and how they're related to each other. And what's exciting is that the early land records have started to be digitized. So when you go into the early land records database on the State Archives website, you may see, rather than select to order something that isn't digitized, a little link that says PDF, and then that's digitized and you can just download it. So on the right, I have a deed from the daughters of Jeremiah Bass, Catherine Pearson and Pigeon, to Anne's either biological son or her stepson, William Pigeon. I've not been able to pin down whether or not they are biologically related. If they are, the Bass family line continues through William. If they are not, the line died with Bass's known biological granddaughter, who's Catherine Pierce's daughter. Her name was Eliza Ann Cottenham. She married Abraham Cottenham, who had children, but she had no biological children of her own. So Catherine and Anne are selling William a lot of acreage in Perth Amboy, New Jersey in 1761. And we know all these people are related, but this deed does not necessarily make it apparent, other than two of them have the same last name, which might perk your ears up and make you do a little bit more research to see if you can figure out how the two of them are connected. I included the bottom just so you could see Catherine and Anne's where there was room left for where they signed, and then their seals. This is a recorded copy of a deed, so this is not their legitimate signature, but the original document would have their signatures and seals on it, which is pretty cool. So again, this would be incredibly useful, probably if you are doing colonial era, maybe revolutionary, maybe a little bit into the early 19th century research, but not that much for deeds, in my opinion. And then complementarily, again, I don't even know if that's a real word. There are the county deeds. Now, I mentioned before that there are two county offices, the county clerks, the county surrogates. County surrogates deals with only estate papers. Clerks has a number of records collections on a variety of topics, and this includes deeds. And once again, they're operating within the same time period as the surrogate. They have deeds from the 1790s if you live or are researching an early county. Otherwise, it's the county's later founding date up through the present. And again, just like the surrogates, these are digitized in that browsable format we discussed earlier. You access the collections through the image search the same way. You just select a different filter under life event. You select property and all the deed records will come up. And again, you're going to get the same great information that you might potentially find in a deed, the kinship, maybe a death time frame mention, and possibly the history of the property. So our example goes back to the Hathaways again. This is Silas Hathaway Jr., not the one who died in 1803. This deed is dated 14. This is Junior and his wife Catherine selling land to Elias Lee. In his will, Silas Sr. made sure that his wife was provided for and her dower rights were protected. Dower rights were a carryover from English law, and basically, usually through property, a wife would be entitled to a third of the property of her husband, the real property or the landed property to make up her dowry. So the top part of this is just to show you Silas and Catherine. But then at the back of this deed is a separate deed, but related. It's a quitclaim from Prudence, Silas Jr.'s mom, who is quit claiming her dower rights. So she is not charging any additional money. This is not a separate sale. She is just waiving any rights that she might have through dower, that third interest she has um, in the land that is being sold so that Silas and his wife can sell it outright. So I thought that was interesting and I included it here. So again, if you're going earlier in the colonial era, you're going to want to check the early land records database. If you're going later, 1790s and onwards, depending on when your county of interest was founded, check the county deeds. Oh, I forgot to move this one over. Oh, well. So another surprising record set are Supreme Court case files. These, again, because so the Supreme Court at this time, so pre-May of 1848, was functioned as an appeals court. So they would hear cases that were being appealed up from lower courts. So they heard all kinds of cases, and you might think, two people fighting over a cord of wood is something that the Supreme Court would not deal with. Well, back then, they did. Many of these files are very light on genealogical information, but if there's an estate case involved, you might be surprised, and you could still potentially hit a gold mine. However, you should still use this resource, even if you don't get a gold mine, because especially in the colonial era, there aren't a whole bunch of city directories, there aren't census records, things that you can check for basic residential information. So these are really great, and don't discount, oh, my ancestor was too poor to sue anyone. These people like to sue each other. I always like to say they didn't have cable back then. What else were they going to do? So a lot of people sued each other a lot. A lot of people had land. Borders between properties were confusing, or maybe they weren't confusing, and your neighbor's just being a jerk and crossing into your acreage to cut down some of your timber, or maybe some of your hogs wandered onto his land and he then branded the hogs and incorporated them into his herd, and you lost that income from that. So this is a good resource if you are in the colonial era and early 18th and I'm sorry, early 19th century to check, because it may contain basic residential and occupational information. Also, if your ancestor provided an affidavit, they were a witness of some kind in a court case, or if they served on a jury, you might get something with their signature on it. And again, these records have started to be digitized. Anything that is not digitized, you can still order from the Supreme Court case files database. I know archivists have worked incredibly hard to provide a little bit of detail about the case, what it's about, who's involved. So you might get a nice little abstract and some basic information about the case before you order. And then I just want to show you an example of a typical rate you might see. Um, this one does not have a lot of genealogical information. It is, however, an estate case. So in their lifetime, in Sussex County, New Jersey, a man named Joseph Sharp and another man named Abiah Brown were sued by a third man named Samuel Hake. Mr. Hake won his case against them. Both Sharp and Brown died, and so this Supreme Court has ordered the sheriff of Sussex County to seize the goods to make up the monies owed to Samuel Hake from the executor's estate. This case in particular was digitized because one of the two defendants, or maybe I should say former defendants, Joseph Sharp, he's dead now, was the founder of Sharpsboro, and he founded an ironworks in Sussex County. And although he stopped using it pre-Revolutionary War, it became a really important munitions site, his foundry and ironworks, after the Revolutionary War. So that's why this particular document is digitized. Unfortunately, it does not have a lot of genealogical information, but it does tell you who the executors are. And if I was interested in either Joseph Sharp or Abiah Brown, I might then go back to the Secretary of State's papers and look up their estates and just confirm all of the information that I found here. So then we have marriage records. Now, marriages are the one comprehensive records collections that we do have for this time period, comprehensive vital records collection. I am sorry. And these are represented in two places. One is the colonial marriage bonds. Although these bonds are not actual marriage records, they are pre-marriage contracts. And because so much money was sworn in surety to the government, uh, they had to swear surety for 500 pounds to make sure there were no legal impediments to the marriage. The marriage was almost 100% went forward. So you could then verify maybe in church records or with a newspaper announcement or something like that, that the actual marriage did occur. They're very boilerplate records. You can see a lot of the form is printed to the right, and then it's filled in with handwriting. Usually it just gives you the parties' names, the county of residence, and maybe an occupation. The one interesting thing is if you are dealing with an underage bride or groom, and remember underage at this time was 21, their parents would need to give a promissory note that they were allowed to get married. So if that existed, you would flip the page that you're seeing and it would be on the back. Now, these two parties that are on this are not underage. And I know because one of them is a Bass. It's our friend Catherine Pierce marrying her husband Edward Pierce, who we have seen earlier in these presentation. What's interesting though, if you are researching in the really early 1700s, there are super early actual marriage records included in this collection as well. And you can look these up and they will appear in the Colonial Marriage Bond Index, and that includes these super early marriages. Unfortunately, this is not a digitized collection, so you will have to order. And then to complement this, our other our other super comprehensive vital records collection are the county marriage records. This is another collection that is held by the county clerk's office. Unlike the other two records group we discussed, these are indexed by name. Yay! So you can search for a particular party. And I got very curious about Lydia Wright, so I went over to Family Search. I went into the county marriages collection and I looked her up to see if I could find her. Um, and I found a likely candidate. Unfortunately, unlike the post May of 1848 records, um, the county marriages do not have a lot of biographical detail. It will not list parents. You usually get the name of the officiant, maybe where they got married, and the two parties' names, which is exactly what you get here. I noticed there are some context clues in this particular marriage record. The groom is from Mannington, which is where Lydia Wright's father, Joseph, was living. It says that she is living in Glensboro. They're pretty close together. This marriage occurred in 1810. Um, so I think she's a good candidate for being the same Lydia of the 6 silver teaspoons, and that's named in Joseph Wright's will. So I will keep this record in my back pocket, and then I would try to verify through other records collections that I had potentially the correct Lydia Wright here. But based on the location, I think there's a pretty good chance that this is the right person. And then finally, another thing, and one that I am sorry that I was not able to fit on my flow chart, are the newspapers. We at the state library do have some colonial era newspapers on microfilm. We also have the New Jersey State Gazette and all of its various names on microfilm as well. Um, we have 2 editions that we have originals of the State Gazette, digitized, that are from 1777 and 1778, I believe. And we are potentially working on getting more digitized. They're just very, very fragile. So that will take us some time. But you can come in and look at the uh, the microfilm newspapers. But one of the really fantastic collections that we do have is a published series of books called the Extracts from American Newspapers Related to New Jersey. This has helped me tremendously in researching in this time period. Um, and like the Index to Wills and Calendar, these are part of the same series, and they were all produced in the early 20th century. So the original series that was produced in the early 20th century covers 1704 to 1780, and that's digitized online. And I have a link to a collection of the volumes for you in this slide. Um, in the 90s, 2 authors did continue the series, starting in 1780 and going up to 1795. However, since those were produced in the 1990s, they are still in copyright, so they are not digitized. So you do have to come to the state library to use those following series in person. But I love the extracts from American newspapers related to New Jersey. The authors pulled from newspapers all over uh, the colonies to get stories about New Jersey, and these might include things like marriage and death announcements, which you can see in our example to the right. They might include just regular news, notices of estate sale, notices of legal action, wanted notices that might have descriptions of criminals, might have descriptions of runaways, might have property descriptions. So this is truly a fantastic resource, and it has been a huge help to me in researching the Bass family. So wanted to point that out. And then other resources that you can get online. I'm not going to go over family search. We've been over that pretty thoroughly. But if you are doing specific Revolutionary War soldier request, uh, Heritage Quest has the Rev War pensions and bounty land warrants, which is incredibly useful. New Jersey residents can get access to this resource via Jersey Clicks with your public library card. Ancestry, I mentioned a few things that were digitized. If you go into the card catalog and under title put in New Jersey, it'll pull up all of the collections that it has for New Jersey. And then you can search and see if you can find anybody. And then Find a Grave is really fantastic. If we found Silas Hathaway's will and we know he's a Revolutionary War veteran and we want to see if we can find a grave image for him, we could go and find a grave and see if we could find him. Some people, because Find a Grave is a free open source volunteer organization and anybody can add to it, some of the entries for individuals are highly, highly detailed. Some include records, some include obituaries. But if there's a lot of information on the page and it's not cited, take the information with a grain of salt and verify what you're reading. The tax ratables are a digitized collection from the New Jersey State Archives. And remember, when we were talking about the Supreme Court, and I said, you know, it's not always sexy. You're not always going to get this big giant gold mine. Sometimes using court records are just a great way to verify where somebody lived. Well, tax ratables is kind of the same thing. If you're researching between the 1772 to about 1822, the dates are a little rough. There are some a little before, some a little after, but that's, you know, roughly where things are. This is an incredible resource, especially considering that most New Jersey census schedules were destroyed and we don't have any comprehensive population schedule collections for New Jersey until 1830. This is a really great surrogate for that if you are searching within this time frame. It's not completely comprehensive and not every single township or municipality has a ratables for a particular year. If you would like more information on how these are useful for genealogy research, read our blog post about it. Our electronic resources librarian, is a major genealogy researcher in South Jersey. Um, and they put some of their experience on how they've used this collection to do genealogy research. So because they're really cool and they're digitized, I just want to show you what the tax ratables are. Again, it would only list the head of house, but you can see it's just a table with what people could potentially be taxed on. Um, and then the people's names are below, and you can see how they were charged. Again, this is really useful if you are trying to verify where somebody lived. If you're curious whether or not your ancestor was an enslaver, or if you had if you're related to somebody who was enslaved, to try to connect the dots and figure out where they were during this time period, this might help you also tremendously. Okay, I I promise we are almost done. I just wanted to plug some of the genealogy resources at the state library. Um, the first four resources on this list, I will admit, kind of only touch on this time period, except for the newspapers, which we've talked about in detail. But we do have some resources for this time period. The Court of Errors and Appeals is going to be a major digital collection for us at the State Library, and it spans roughly a 100-year time period from 1845, which is pre-May of 1848, up to 1947. We only have about 1,200 cases up so far. They're skewed to the 20th century so far, but the Court of Errors and Appeals collection is kind of similar to the Supreme Court. In 1845, when it was established, it was the highest appeals court that you could go to, even above the Supreme Court. So if you wanted a final decision, you would go here. So we are getting started on this collection, but we've already found a number of divorce cases with significant genealogical information and some estate cases as well. So keep an eye on this collection as we're going forward. So anything in the top four-ish bullet points, except for newspapers, apply the knowledge there to your ancestors that you have to research in order to get back to the pre-May of 1848 time period. Although for city directories, we do have some pre-May of 1848, nothing dating back to like colonial or early 19th century, but I think Trenton, Jersey City, and Newark all have pre-May of 1848 city directories that are like 1840s, maybe 1830s. The bottom part of this does pertain to the pre-May of 1848 time period. So after the errors and appeals, we have about 164 family history charts. The catalog, these are not digitized, but I've put together a little catalog guide for you, which I have linked. And then below the family history chart, all of these other resources are in our book collection. We have a really extensive family histories collection, regional collections, military resources, heraldry guides, ethnic resources, religious group resources, and our book collection is not just limited to the state of New Jersey. We cover many of the United States states, and we have some international resources as well. In the next slide, I just want to show you something very quickly about searching for family histories. Our catalogers are awesome, and they have cataloged, or they have indexed the surnames that appear in books. So you can build a collection of family histories on a particular family surname. So if you were interested in the Post family, you would do a subject keyword search and put the phrase Post family in quotes, and that's how you would generate a list. You can then sort your list in publication date order, because many family histories, also many town and county histories, were published pre-copyright, so before 1931. And then you can use our catalog to build yourself a book list, and you can copy and paste the titles into Google and see if you can find the books digitized online. So I did want to show you that. And then I just want to close in with a few takeaways. Most important, if your ancestor lived after May of 1848 and they stayed in New Jersey, get the vital records. And then don't forget, there are a bunch of browsable county collections on the Family Search image collections. And the state archives has started to digitize some of their records collection as well. You can find some of these records in their databases, but if you do a catalog search, if you're curious to see what they have, You may open a finding aid and find links to digitized item. They also do have a digital repository on their website that you can check. Flip side of that, although we are trying to make more things accessible and available, you're probably still in this time period going to have to go to a repository. You will not be able to access everything from home, or if you may have to go behind a paywall to pay for certain records as well. Not everything is free, unfortunately. I hope that I showed you examples of how, in May of 1848, rather than having, that one death certificate that gives you a lot of information, kind of have to jump from place to place to place to get certain information. You do anyway, even after you look at a death a post May of 1848 record, but you just have to do a little bit more jumping when you're researching in this pre-May of 1848 time period. And I really hope this kind of illustrated, how you kind of navigate a little bit through various records collections to piece together the information you want. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to leave my contact information up here, and I'm going to turn my camera back on, and I am happy to answer any questions that you have.
All right. Thank you so much, Regina. If anybody does have questions, you can send them our way using the Q&A or the chat features in Zoom, and we'll be happy to address them. So, were records from Hudson County destroyed and no longer available for any part of the records period?
No, that's the very simple answer. So you can, if you are referring specifically to the vital records controversy, send me an email. Because I don't remember all the details off the top of my head. I have to do a little bit more research.
Have you ever found any Native American names or signatures on the early land record deeds?
Yes. And what you can do is when you go into early land records, there's a filter in the search called ethnicity, and you can select Native American. And when I was working at the archives, Native American deeds were my little pet project. It really made me angry that the WPA indexes erase their names, even though William Nelson, in his early New Jersey deeds and patents, did not. He recorded in the names. And they reduced, in the WPA indexes, they reduced individuals to the word Indians. And that made me mad. So I wanted to make sure the early land records captured, who the people were. So yes. And it's kind of cool because on some of the documents, like they have little like insignia signatures. So like they might draw like a little turkey or something next to their name. So that's pretty cool.
If location within New Jersey is yet unknown for pre-1848 records, what is the best method for searching?
What I would do then is if you're not sure where in New Jersey they are, I would then go on the Supreme Court case files if it's that early time period and do a search because that's not restricted by county. Unless your ancestor has a name like John Smith or something, that might be a good way to identify where they are. Remember, Supreme Court is not only good for potential genealogical gold mines, it's good for establishing location because these people like to sue each other. Also, you can do the same thing in the early land records. Just look up a name and not specify a location and see if you can find them that way. And this is if we are dealing with that particular time period. Now, if you are later in the 19th century, like you're 1830 or after, and you know who the head of house was, then I would start looking in the census by the head of house's name.
Would Hunterdon County or Mercer County have early Trenton records?
Yes. I don't know that they would have, like, if you are looking for municipal records, the answer is no. But just records that happen to be in the city of Trenton, like if somebody is selling some land or they want a tavern license or they're taking out a mortgage or they died and their estate is there, then yes, maybe. Remember, though, these county offices were established in like 1780, 1790. So if that's too late for your time period, the records will not be there. But if you're looking in that 1790s time period forward, then yes. And also 1790s is a little iffy too, because some of the counties do have a few earlier records. It's just most of them fall into that. The best thing to do is to check specifically with the county clerk, county surrogates, and see what date range they have. But just it kind of averages out to that founding date of the county.
Right. I don't see any more questions. I'll give it a minute or two in case anybody thinks of anything. But anything you want to wrap up with and close with, Regina?
Yep, just don't forget, if you have any questions, please reach out to me. If you find anything that I need to update in this presentation, please let me know, because I just found out about those recorded wills yesterday, and I didn't really have a chance to check whether or not it was a new and comprehensive collection. I didn't see it on the list of New Jersey collections in the card catalog. So if you ever notice something that I covered in my class and you found information to contradict it, please do reach out for me. Um, Also, I know Andrew also mentioned this. If you have any questions about the flowchart, any questions about anything on the slide, please go ahead and reach out to me.
All right. Somebody asked, is an appointment still required? Can you comment on that for the library as well as the archives?
An appointment is still required for the state archives. You can go on their website to schedule an appointment. The state library has visiting hours weekdays from 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. So you can come in anytime you want between those times. If you would like to come uh, between 8:30 and 10 a.m., either email me or you can email the reference desk at refdesk@njstatelib.org to set up an appointment.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Regina, and thank you everybody for attending today. I hope you found this program very useful and a lot of great information. But please, if you have any questions, if you're stuck with any roadblocks, please email Regina. She is a genealogy wizard. And as I mentioned earlier in the beginning, we do have the genealogy research guide. I'm going to post it again in the chat. That has all the information that's been covered here today, links to the different slides, links to previous programs that she's done, and a whole bunch of resources. So please check that out. When you have a minute. It's a really, really wonderful resource. And I'd just like to close with everybody be safe, be well, and hopefully we'll see you soon.